Why a free, stable, and prosperous Ukraine at peace with its neighbors matters. I'd like to think that the answer to that is probably obvious for most of us in this room. Nonetheless, I will recap and give a few points. And I've been asked to do so from the U.S. government perspective. I just want to make clear I work for the legislative branch. Chairman Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, chairman of the U.S. Helsinki Commission, and probably I'd like to think that there is no greater friend in Congress of Ukraine and Ukraine's efforts than Roger Wicker. But I also want to make clear that I don't speak for him, and these remarks are my own perspective. So as Walter said, I just came back from my 8th trip to Ukraine since the full-scale invasion. This trip was mostly in Kiev. I've spent many of my earlier trips were in more forward areas. So I've tried to I've basically seen most of the line from the north to the south, as well as visited Ukrainian cities in the east and the west. Since the full-scale invasion, the Helsinki Commission, which has long focused, in fact, Orest Dechakivsky, a living proof of this as to how long we've focused on Ukraine. But since the full-scale invasion, we decided to exclusively focus on Ukraine. And insofar as we look at other questions in the region, we look at them through a lens of how this contributes to Ukraine's victory. Because really, the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe is literally in our middle name, and there's not a whole lot of it with a massive war in Europe. So why does it matter? Well, it matters. Let me speak a few points to the why, a few points to the how, and conclude with a little bit of hope. Does that work? So on the why, the outcome, something like a Ukrainian victory, right, is really the only way you get to a Ukraine that's free, prosperous, and at peace with its neighbors. And this is first and foremost our best hope of shoring up the post-war U.S.-led international order, which has largely kept the peace in Europe, enabled trade, and promoted not just prosperity in Europe, but prosperity in the United States, right? Transatlantic prosperity. So point one. Point two, helping a friendly state fend off an unprovoked genocidal attack is a moral imperative. And we're a moral people, right? This is and I'd like to think this isn't a value statement. This is rooted in realism. This is who we are as a people. It's who we've been over the long haul. And so, that's what we need to do. And I think that's what we will do. And you look at polling and things continue to show that there's robust support across this country to supporting Ukraine in what is probably the most textbook example of a just war. Third point, should Ukraine emerge from this war mostly intact, its battle-hardened armed forces, its innovative and reinvigorated and growing defense industrial base will be the best keeper of security in Europe, right? And frankly, will do more to keep the peace in Europe than NATO or the combined nuclear arsenals of the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. From the U.S. perspective, we can't afford not to be allied with such a credible deterrent force in a part of the world that accounts for most of our trade, imports and exports, and a part of the world that we are still treaty bound to defend. On the how do we do this in this particular moment? As long as Ukrainians are willing to resist, Western democracies should support their fight. The United States has done more than any other state to support Ukraine. And I'm not speaking just since the full-scale invasion. With all due respect, many European states, especially you look at it on a per capita basis, have done an incredible amount. But the U.S. over the decades has bolstered Europe's defensive capabilities vis-a-vis the Russian threat. From logistics to lift to all of these things, it can't be done without the infrastructure and the know-how the United States has enabled in Europe. There are many things the United States can still do and still deliver to Ukraine and to Europe that are harder to quantify than money and weapons, but still real and needed. No other state in the world has the ability to confer or deny political legitimacy on another state, another leader, or any settlement. Vladimir Putin cares more about relevance than he does about being liked. The United States should act accordingly and consign him to maximum irrelevance, and should never confer legal recognition on any Russian territorial gains in Ukraine. The United States should also prioritize Ukraine's use of the Dnieper River, access to the Black Sea, and ultimate control over the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. That's a big one. With the nuclear, with those 6 reactors in Ukraine's control or pumping power to Ukraine, Ukraine immediately becomes a net energy exporter to Europe. So what can the Europeans do? Europeans should provide Ukraine's urgent and unmet monetary needs, right? They don't have to provide all of Ukraine's monetary needs, but they need to fill the shortfalls. They have the money, and they can decide for themselves how much they spend from their own coffers and how much they confiscate from the Russian state assets held in their banks. And given the West's depleted stockpile of weapons, the lead time and cost of new production, as well as a desire to avoid stoking inflation in their own economies, European states should arm Ukraine using mechanisms such as the Danish model. And this is a model where European states use their wealth to purchase weapons for Ukraine from Ukrainian producers inside Ukraine. Ukraine still has the ability to produce more. It just doesn't have the money to produce more. And at this moment, I think roughly 40% of the kit Ukraine is using on the battlefield is being produced inside Ukraine. Finally, to end on a note of hope, I was just in Kiev recently. I met with as many Ukrainians as I could possibly squeeze into my brief visit. Slept very little when to account for having to. I was with the embassy this time, so I couldn't sleep through air raids. I had to follow the rules and stay within the green zone and hallway or bunker as instructed. But no one I spoke to expects an end to this war anytime soon. No one holds out any hope for this peace process, for any ceasefire. At the same time, no one I spoke to is ready to concede anything to an aggressor hell-bent on erasing them, erasing their culture, their existence, and their individual physical persons, right? This is all very personal for Ukrainians. They're exhausted, but they fight on because they have no other choice if they want to survive. I really wish more Americans could see this and go to Ukraine and just see what Ukraine looks like at war. The roads are great. The gas stations and restrooms are cleaner than they are here. You can find my little favorite Starbucks double shot espresso cans, which have all been replaced in this country by these oversized energy drinks that occasionally taste a little bit like coffee. Your phone works well. The Wi-Fi is often faster, and they hold book fairs complete with music and food carts under not simply the threat, but the reality of constant Russian attack that can come in the form of Garand 2 drones, can come in the form of ballistic missiles, which you have about 3 minutes to shelter from. They do all this, right? Life goes on. These are not the marks of a country that's on the verge of defeat. These are the marks of a society that wants to live, that goes on living, and that teaches us how to live more fully. Ukrainians have learned in this war not to fear the Russians. And it's time that we learn to shed our fear of the Russians too. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.